Every painting tells a story, but the paintings in this room not only tell a story, but they have a story of their very own. In 1954, Harold Newton, a young African-American who was born in Fort Pierce and who had been drawing for most of his life, met the renowned Fort Pierce artist, Albert Ernest Beanie Backus. Having grown up in the pre-civil rights Jim Crow South, Newton had taught himself to paint and with little hope of becoming a real artist, concentrated on painting religious scenes that were popular among his neighbors. Newton's meeting with Backus changed both his art and his life. Backus, most known for his regional Florida landscapes, worked with Newton and encouraged him to move away from religious themes and to paint landscapes. The talented Newton found the change in theme and style comfortable, but as an African-American artist, found the conventional art world, except for Backus, all but closed to him. For Newton, there were no gallery shows and no lucrative commissions. Instead, Newton distributed his paintings through the only outlet available to him. He sold them on the streets and roads of Martin, St. Lucie, and Indian River County. His gallery was the trunk of his car, and his commissions seldom exceeded $25. He was successful enough to eke out a living, and as a result became a hero of sorts to other young African-American Fort Pierce artists. A year later, in 1955, Fort Pierce High School art teacher Zenobia Jefferson arranged for one of her students, Alfred Hare, to take art lessons from Beanie Backus. Hare was ambitious and a quick study. In 1957, Hare left Backus ready to go out on his own. His goal was to become a millionaire by his 35th birthday, and his first step towards that goal was to develop a specific business strategy based on Newton's sell-it-on-the-road model. Hare understood the power of numbers, and his strategy was directly opposite to that of conventional artists. He would paint as fast as he could, create in bulk, and sell his work at a price that would encourage purchases by the mass market of working people. Like Newton, Hare met some success. The two young African-American artists became catalysts that created a small group of African-American artists, all living in Fort Pierce and all selling their work on the roads of the Treasure Coast. By the end of the 1950s, the group had grown to include 26 artists. The work of the group became, in a sense, a standard purchase for the new residents that migrated to the Treasure Coast in the 1960s and 1970s. Focusing on local scenes, dynamic beach landscapes, palm trees bending in the wind, peaceful yet vibrantly colored poinciana trees, the paintings appealed to the new residents because they represented what each person was looking for in this new home. The community knew the group simply by word of mouth. Some residents knew only that these colorful paintings were done by some black men in Fort Pierce. The story of one Hobe Sound woman is typical. Relocating to Hobe Sound in the early 1960s, the retiree had seen paintings by the group in the homes of her friends. Armed only with the knowledge that the work was sold on the road in Fort Pierce, the woman made the almost 35-mile trip in pursuit of an ocean painting. Unable to find any of the artists selling on U.S. Highway 1, she went to the Fort Pierce police station and asked about where she might find these uncommon painters. The officer on duty offered to take her directly to the home of one of the painters. There, she found an ocean scene that she liked, bought the painting for under $20, and it hung in her home until she died some 20 years later. The paintings by the group appeared not only in area homes, but also in businesses throughout the Treasure Coast. The artists, because their focus was on selling paintings, not just creating art, intuitively understood aggressive marketing and began to personally visit local businesses with their work. It was a boom time in the history of the Treasure Coast, and the paintings, mostly sold by simply knocking on doors with a painting in hand, became part of the decor of the newly established area businesses. The work graced the walls of real estate offices, doctors' offices, and banks from Martin County to Indian River County. These 25 African American men and one woman broke the mold of employment for area African Americans. Instead of working in orange groves and as day laborers, they made a sustainable living as entrepreneurial artists. Even with this unusual success, it would take 40 years before the group was recognized by the legitimate art world. In 1994, art expert Jim Fitch gave a name to the group. He called them the Highwaymen. The name gave a professional credence to the group, and they found that their paintings gained acceptance as an art form that not only represented a region, but also created the popular trademark image of that region. This month, the Elliott Museum is exhibiting a collection of 50 Highwaymen paintings. The exhibit opened with a reception for the artists that attracted over 500 guests. At that reception, we met some of these pioneering African Americans, as well as some of the area residents who own their paintings. Join us now to learn a little bit more about these artists. Joining us now here in the gallery at the Elliott Museum is one of the Highwaymen himself, and an original Highwayman, Isaac Knight. Isaac, it's really a pleasure to meet you tonight and to kind of get to know you a little bit.
It's great to be here.
Tell us a little bit about your experience with the Highwaymen. When did you start painting?
I started painting in about 1959, I'm sorry. And I first started out building frames, even going out on the highway selling painting. And for a few years after that, I started painting myself.
Okay. And tell us, are you from Fort Pierce?
I'm originally from Tallahassee. I moved to Fort Pierce in 1959.
And so that's how you got involved with
I got involved with. I met a lot of the group, and we all were sort of, like acquaintance, and so we started hanging out together and picking up pointers from each other, and then we just started painting from that. Some was painting before I got down here, and I was inspired by what they were doing, so I thought I would join the ranks.
How did you get interested in painting itself?
Well, I just really loved the state of Florida, and when they was painting something that would really represent the state, and I was really thrilled to know that. So I thought I can become a part. I really didn't know I could do it until I really got into it. So it became very interesting.
Now you mentioned that the paintings represent the state of Florida, and I just happen to have an example of one of your paintings, and I'm going to try to hold it up. It's a little difficult because it is in a book, but tell us a little bit about this painting. What's the title?
Well, this is a sunset on the Indian River. It's a painting I did probably in 1975, and it was one that was just a single palm. And it was one afternoon. It was really, really red in the sky. And when I got home, the first thing I did was grab my paintbrush and start painting, and this is what I came up with.
Now, that was an interesting thing that I read about your group, that very often you didn't sit and paint what you saw, but you painted from memory.
Right, yeah. Very seldom I ever, go out to a site and paint, because a lot of time you get disturbed by, people, or not only people, but like a lot of birds, bugs and things are flying the paint. And we use oil, and if that get in there to mess your paint up. So sometimes we'll take a snapshot. If we didn't do that, we'll go home and paint from memory. And usually it come out pretty close.
Yeah, I noticed that. The other question is, how many paintings have you sold?
I really have no idea. It's in the thousands.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
What, are you still painting?
That's all I do now. I paint, I retired in 94, and since then I paint every day.
And what did you do before you retired?
I worked at Grumman Aerospace as a Grumman Aerospace technician. I worked there for 31 years.
And are you selling any of your retired paintings now?
Yes.
And that's good, I think.
Very good.
Just tell me what it means to you to be part of this exhibit and to get this kind of exposure for something that you did a few years ago.
It's almost unbelievable. I really enjoyed it, and one of the most rewarding things is meeting so many nice people. And that's one of the greatest thrills, because you would never meet the type of people that we normally meet if we wasn't doing what we do. So, and that's one of the biggest pleasures that I get.
Well, we want to thank you very much for taking time out to join us. Now go sell some more paintings.
Good to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joining us now is a very important person. This is Raleigh Bailey. And Raleigh, you're president of the Treasure Coast Multicultural Artists Association.
Correct. Yes.
What's this event like for you?
It's been awesome. This event is very awesome. It's giving recognition to a group of men who've been practicing for over 50 years, and their work is outstanding.
It is outstanding. Raleigh, tell us a little bit about your association.
Well, our association is called the Treasure Coast Multicultural Artists Association, and we're helping to sponsor the event to bring about the Highwaymen show here at the Elliott Museum, and we're trying to just expose the people to the different cultures that we have out here and trying to get some recognition for the Highwaymen and carry that on to the next generation.
Raleigh, do you have a Highwayman painting?
I do not have a Highwayman personally, but my mother has one that she bought, and she loves it and cherishes it to death. I can't afford it. I'm a starving artist.
Tell us about your art.
Well, my art is not the traditional Highwayman art. I do a unique style. I have a unique style of art. I do various types of art, and I taught for 24 years. And the work that I see that these men are doing, I'd like to see that passed down to the next generation.
That's great. How long have you been involved with the Multicultural Artists Association?
Well, we formed this organization 2 years ago. We have a 501c3. We are a nonprofit organization. We're located here in Stewart. And so we are trying to just do what we can to help the community in that aspect, in the cultural arts.
Well, we want to thank you for taking some time with us tonight and for being instrumental in putting this show together. It's wonderful.
We want to thank you so much for this wonderful interview and for the support you've given this organization.
We are very fortunate to have a Highwayman with us right now. This is Willie Reagan. And Willie, this painting right next to us belongs to you.
That's correct. Yes, this is one of my Florida sunsets done on the Indian River.
When did you paint this?
Well, this one was painted in the last 2 years, within 2 years. I started back in 2001 after a 22-year hiatus.
Is that right?
Yes, I didn't paint for 22 years because the market died in the year of 80. So I just started back 2 years ago.
Tell us a little bit about how you got started and when you first painted.
Well, I started back in '66 with a group of artists around Vero Beach. It was Ellis Butler, George Butler, and Alphonse Moran, and myself. And the four of us started. Well, they started when I got back out of the Army in '66. They were already painting. So I started with them. And eventually I built my home and built a studio inside of my home. And I kind of pulled away from the group, you know. Plus I was teaching too. And even the year of 1980 when the market died, I gave up on it and just started back 2 years ago. So I'm glad to be back.
Now, what did you do in that 22 years?
I was teaching art in the school system of Indian River County and remodeling houses. And you know what I mean? God has given me the talent to be able to do everything it comes down when it comes down to remodeling a house. You know, I do carpentry, electrical, and plumbing. I do the floor tile, I do it all, and I enjoy doing that. In fact, I wasn't certain 2 years ago whether I was coming back into painting or not, but thank God I'm back.
You were having too much fun renovating houses.
Yes, I was doing that.
Tell us what it means to you to be back in painting.
Oh, it means so much to me because now I have time to really get into it. And, you know, I spend a lot of time. I do quite a bit with the detail. And, you know, now I have time. When I started in '66, we were trying to make a few bucks, you know what I mean? But now it's not the money as much as it is, you know, satisfying my clients. I really get a big thrill out of watching people enjoy my artwork.
That's great. I have kind of a painting question for you.
Yes.
Has your style changed over the years?
Somewhat. I now get involved quite a bit with the clouds, you know, a lot of contrasting clouds, and this is what people seem to like, you know, and we have quite a bit of that in Florida. You know, the bright sunsets, you know what I mean, and great contrasting colors. And I enjoy, like I said, watching other people enjoy my paintings.
That's great. Willie, we want to thank you for taking some time out. And do you think maybe you'll sell this painting tonight?
Oh, yes. It'll be sold. I'm not worried about it.
Okay, that's good.
Okay,
thank you very much.
Thank you.
To open the exhibit, the Elliott Museum presented a lecture by Okeechobee artist Robert Butler. Butler, younger than most of the Highwaymen, was associated with the group for a short time during his early career. Butler's paintings depart slightly from those of the earlier Highwaymen. His work reflects his lifelong experience with Florida's interior. Butler's landscapes focus on scenes depicting wildlife and fauna found in the Okeechobee area, as well as the agricultural tradition that is still part of Florida's interior areas. Butler took the lessons he learned from the Highwaymen, and in the tradition of that first Highwayman, Alfred Hare, expanded on them, both in terms of his art and his entrepreneurial activity. Now known worldwide, Butler operates his own studio, sells his work on the internet, produces and hosts PBS television specials, and has developed a how-to painting kit that is marketed through the QVC cable network. Join us now and meet artist and youngest Highwayman, Robert Butler.
I hope, is this mic working pretty good? Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here to speak with you this morning. I'd like to see a show of hands, or how many of you have seen my works or been at a demonstration or something like that? Okay, great. Okay, every good communicator knows to test his audience first, so he'll know how to conduct his work. It's a pleasure to come and speak with you about my art, and the floor will be open for any questions you might have. I'm not saying I'll answer all of them, but you're free to ask them. And so we'll have that kind of forum here today. And what I will try to do is cover something of course, my history as a painter growing up in Central Florida there, and basically in Okeechobee is where I grew up at for the first 33 years of my life, and then moved on out to other places all over the world to paint. All of you know about the Highwaymen, which we have come to be called as of, I think, 5 or 6 years ago. It is the first time that we have been put together collectively into a group. And if anyone in this room has ever tried to put artists together in a group and call them by a single name, you must know how difficult that is. I brought with me today a manuscript from a book I'm writing on my life story, which I'm going to release by the end of this year. Hopefully, it's almost completed now. And I just want to give you a couple of blips out of there as I talk about my history and invite you to ask some questions. Now, let me first get set up here on this, put this painting up. I don't think that this painting needs any explanation in this area of the world. Now, I do have some pass-outs. If somebody at the museum can make these available, we have a table somewhere we can put these on. So different information there. Okay. You can put them on the table so everybody can get one copy of it as they need it. And let me quickly get into my painting garb here. I was going to comment earlier that it mentioned that I did over 100 paintings a year when I started to work back in the 60s. Well, I was intent on raising 9 children on art. Now you figure out the rest. It just so happened that I got my start in Okeechobee early. In about 1964 is when I actually started to paint in the fall of '64. I had worked at the hospital until that time, and then when I went to 68, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to read my own story to keep track here. I started to paint professionally around 1968, fall of '68. That was after I came back from McLean, Virginia. Well, prior to going to Virginia, I worked in Okeechobee General Hospital for most of 1968, from the early part of that, the prior year, 67, until 68. During that time, I was painting on the side. The Highwaymen were active in my area of Florida, all over, going out and selling their works and all. And I met Hezekiah Baker and Al Black and a couple other guys who would come through my region of the state selling their work. I got acquainted with Hezekiah, and I would make visits back and forth, and he and I had some long-term friendship. And today, as I stand here, I'm the first official president of the Highwaymen Artists LLC organization. We finally got together and legalized that. And so we have a show scheduled in the governor's mansion for next year, and it's the first of many, many things that you'll be seeing showing up by this group of artists, a part of the Highwaymen. And hopefully, eventually, we'll have the whole group included on field trips and television and all kinds of things. 68, I started out, and I first started painting the local territory around Okeechobee there. That's where I began at. And my first thoughts in painting was to cover some of the subjects that I was familiar with. I love fishing. My sister fished, my mother fished when we were younger, and we would go to all these beautiful places, most of them on the side of the road in ditches, but you know, with a few other pretty nice places. And I got a sense of the environment that way, and I started to think about that, the birds and all of the plants and things that inhabited my environment. And so when I first started to paint, that was the thing that come to mind. I was so anxious to tell the world about the place I live and the world I experience in my own eyes, till painting was just an avenue. It's much like, I guess, if you're a singer, you sing about the things of life and you want to expound all the beauties of life and the interesting things of life to people. So I was so intent on doing that, till that's partly where that 100 paintings a year come from. I didn't go to art school. I wasn't trained. I did take a Norman Rockwell famous art school course in about 65, I think it was. Let me move this jacket up to there. And I made A's and B's on that test. But one of the things that really settled in on me early was that I thought I lived in a unique place in Okeechobee there in the swamps and things around there. And I had seen nothing out there that resembled it. And so that uniqueness, that environment that I had, I loved it and I wanted to show and tell other people about it. So after I took those initial tests in Norman Rockwell, I said, okay, now I know I can draw. Somebody else thinks I can draw anyway and paint. So at that point, I dropped the course and went to painting what I thought I saw in the world I lived in. And that's the way it's been ever since now, 35 years as of this year, that from 1968 to now when I started to paint professionally. Now, my theme was wildlife and landscape. Back in those days, you might imagine having 9 kids to raise and a job at the hospital. Money was a little on the light side, and so hunting and fishing was one of the things that my kids grew up around and doing because it was a practical thing in our situation. When I went out some mornings, I'd go to work at the hospital where I worked at as an orderly in 1968. But first, I'd get up early, I'd get my fishing pole, and I'd go down to the local spillway, catch 2 or 3 big bass sometimes, bring them home, clean them, put them with some grits, and all the family had a good time. So it cut the grocery bill that way. But it also gave me the opportunity to get out there in nature at early light and see all the wonderful things about the world out there, the fog that rises off the water early in the morning, the sounds of the birds, the forest waking up. All of those things were by osmosis coming in and feeding into my mental picture of the world that I lived in. And so that's the way it went for a while, developing there in Okeechobee. Then after 68, I came back from McLean and started painting professionally. First, it was there in Okeechobee, and then other people started to notice my work. Now, how I knew how to go out and sell my paintings was because of the Highwaymen, the guys who were there before me and already moving around in that environment. I had people in my own hometown who supported me and were very interested in what I was doing, and they would purchase my work and encourage me and do all of those things. But the active sales part of that, moving out on the highway, was learned from the practice of the other guys who were doing this. And so I simply mimicked that and started going out on the road. Well, the first thing I found out was being a person that's oriented toward marketing, and I say that again in the context that I had to be interested in something that was successful because I could not go back home and face those 9 kids and my wife empty-handed. So there's a sense of tension there. I knew I had to be successful in order to stay at being an artist. And my wife was very, very gracious in that capacity that she allowed me to do this. And I don't know whether it was that or whether she was so in love with me she didn't care. But I got to do that, and she supported me in every aspect of that. And I don't think till this day she knows how important her role was in all of that, because that was a solid backup that I knew I had out there no matter what happened or what I did, whether I sold anything or not. I knew I had her support. That moral support was more valuable than she will ever know to this day. It served as a basis or premise, one of the basis or premise on which I could go out and do all the things that I planned to do. And it also probably added some extra interest in knowing that she was counting on me, had given me the free reins and counted on me to support the family. And where I got it from, my strong interest in making sure that the family was taken care of first, is that in the, I got to push the book a little bit. In the coming up book I've got, I explain a little bit about my background. This will be the front cover, and I got a few notes here I'm going to talk about today. But when I grew up, or rather when I was born in Georgia, Baxley, Georgia. My mother and father were sharecroppers, and they separated around 1947. And my mother was the one that raised me and my brother and several other kids. Well, she was a very interesting woman now that I'm old enough to determine that. And I look back, at the time I was growing, all I could see was she wanted me to work after I come from school instead of playing. But now I understand how all of that fits into the picture. She was a work ethic kind of person and set a real fine example for all of us in the family. All of the kids turn out to be entrepreneurs and self-operating, self-supporting type people. And I really think that comes directly from my mother, because she was very, very strong in that sense. So as I moved along the line there and developed my abilities and started to move out into other places, started to travel and sell work on the road, my central area was Central Florida. And that was because it was specific to the subject that I painted and worked with. I lived in the center part where we had the large oak hammocks, the cypress swamps, the marshes, and the wildlife associated with that. And that's what I painted. That's what I loved. And so when I came over to the coast, I had to find somebody who had a hunt cabin out in my part of the world to sell to. And incidentally, that was usually the doctors and the lawyers. I sold a lot to them on the coast over here. But the practice of going out on the highway and selling your work was well ingrained in that time period and went on for several years. Now, where I kind of veer off the course of selling my work on the highways was in 1969. By that time, I was doing well enough that I had another young man working for me. He would take my work out, show it, get orders for it, and bring it back. In 1969, a museum curator at the Polk County Citrus Showcase saw some of my work. Guy's name was Don Harrell. He saw it, he liked it, he invited me over for an exhibit at the Polk Museum in 1970. Well, the acts of providence, I call it, that I talk a lot about in this book, is the picture I get when I look back over my life. And I think each one of us probably have similar experiences where we can look at things and see how unusual things fit together in just the right time to move us to that next point. That's what happened to me in 1969, is that Dr. Rollison in Okeechobee, the same doctor that delivered all 9 of those kids, he knew me well, and he found this book by a woman artist named Elizabeth B. Duffy. Elizabeth B. Duffy lived in New York, New Jersey, somewhere up in there. And she was a very good and prolific artist that worked for a magazine. And she had come to Florida in the 1800s, late 1800s, on horse and buggy. They traveled around on that all over Florida. And she did paintings of the places that she went. And when she did those paintings, she would do, the sketches first. And she would do notes on we camped at this site at such and such time, and she'd make observations about the surrounding environment. And I got that from Dr. Rollison, was his name, and because he knew I was painting, he knew I was interested, and besides I owed a big medical bill too, and so that's, sure that had something to do with it. But I got the book from him, and I read that, looked at those pictures, and it sort of dovetailed with that showing at the museum. Well, I thought of putting the two things together. I said, what if I do since I got my first museum showing, what if I do a special series on the county that I'm going to have this show in? Lakeland, Winter Haven. So there were pictures in from that area there. And so I picked out 10 of those pictures and did paintings of them, and then I also did my work on the side. That show we had for the first time as a highwayman. I had been out selling paintings, and I had sold paintings up to $100, $150. At this show, the museum show, I sold a painting for $500 for the first time. Now, if you can guess what that means to Okeechobee boy growing up, starting to paint and getting out there and selling his work, and then having someone pay $500 for a painting. That's a long time ago, but I still remember that experience. And so I and the guy who was working for me, we went out and, of course, celebrated. That show was a very successful show. Nearly 2/3 or more of the paintings sold. And then the next year I was invited back to do another one. Well, that started off in 1970, and pretty much for the next 7 or 8 years, I had an annual show at the